Good day, my name is Ricardo Wyngaard, and in this video I want to talk about Principle 3 of the King Report on Corporate Governance. Now, this report deals with an organization being a responsible corporate citizen. So let's look at what is said under Principle 3 of the King Report. Now, this concept of being a corporate citizen has been around for over 50 years. It's not a new concept, but the concept has evolved over the years. Previously, in the earlier years, being a responsible corporate citizen for a corporate meant that they would make voluntary philanthropic commitments or undertakings to non-profit organizations or to society. It was a way of giving back to society, but it was at the discretion of the corporate, and there was no obligation to do so. In fact, it wasn't part of the business strategy of the organization to provide donations. It was just a voluntary commitment. I think it may have been beneficial for business purposes, but it wasn't central to what the business was doing. However, over the years, this concept has evolved. There's a lot of theory that's been written regarding corporate citizenship. It has now come to the point where being a responsible corporate citizen is actually or should be part of the business strategy of the organization. It should be a core component of what the organization does. And in the South African context, it's important. Clearly, within terms of King 4, it's important because it's principle number 3 out of 16 principles that are relevant to all corporations in terms or organizations in terms of the King Report. It's also important in terms of the BE codes, because the last element on the scorecard is socioeconomic development, which relates to the engagement with the community by the corporate or by the organization. So it's clearly an important issue, and King 4 is a bit deliberate in terms of what the organization should do in line with its status as a responsible corporate citizen. In particular, the King 4 report recommends that the board should determine how the organization will address and approach its status as a responsible corporate citizen. And in particular, the organization should ensure that there's compliance with the Constitution, with the relevant laws, principles, and policies. So it's quite important. It's a broad sort of approach, but then King 4 gets a bit more detailed, and it also deals with the concept of the alignment of that status in terms of the organization's core purpose, its values, its strategies, and its conduct. So if you want to assess the organization's commitment to it being a responsible corporate citizen, you have to check what it's doing, its conduct, its values, its strategy, and then it goes further. It says there should be agreement between the board and management, and this agreement should focus on putting targets and measures into place to make sure that the organization give effect to it being seen as a responsible corporate citizen. Not only being seen, but actually being a responsible corporate citizen. And it focuses on 4 areas. The one is at the workplace. 2 particular areas I want to highlight. The one is remuneration, to make sure that there's fair remuneration for employees. Secondly, the issue of unfair employment equity. Now, there's an obligation on an employer in terms of the Employment Equity Act to remove any unfair barriers that may result in unfair discrimination. So, for example, within the context of a non-profit organization, if you have an employee who's maybe wheelchair bound, the obligation is on the organization to ensure that it removes those barriers, and there should be a proactive approach in doing so to ensure that there's no unfair discrimination. I know there are budget constraints within organizations, but that doesn't remove the obligation to do that kind of exercise. Secondly, The organization should focus on the economics of the organization. That includes economic transformation, and the organization should also put measures and targets into place in terms of preventing fraud and corruption. The third element deals with society, and this is especially what I think the engagement between the non-profit sector and corporates are important. So the organization should take into account issues like consumer protection, as well as the society and the communities where it operates in. And then lastly, the issue of the environment, which is becoming increasingly important. It's both an obligation on corporates and the organization. And I think there's lots of scope for collaboration in that regard. So, in a nutshell, King 4, principle number 3. I hope it's been useful. If you like it, please click the like button. If you think others can benefit from it, please share. Thank you for those that have shared the other videos. I do appreciate it.